Hello, everyone. Hello, I'm a little shook up actually. As I was walking in here, I paused to my right, and there was a little niche that commemorated Dr. Malcolm Naneacha. So I think too often I kind of live in my little bubble. I'm not looking at Facebook. I don't know what's going on, and so I'm just a little heartbroken. He did so much for the Hawaiian community, and he was actually extremely obsessed with the topic that we are going to be talking about. He spent a lot of his years thinking about Na'akua hulu manu, the feathered god images. He wrote a lot about Kuka'ilimoku. He spent many years abroad at different museums researching, and he brought that knowledge back and he shared it with the community. So Ke awine kala velo velo Ke awine kala velo velo Ke mo lehu lehu mai nei na kolo Ke mo lehu lehu mai nei na kolo ma'avihi lani he mo alohe kukulu o kalani alohe kukulu o kahunua awe anu o umaui hivihi lone awe. Okay. Ali'i, Ahu'ula, the most treasured of chiefly possessions. Ali'i were known by their Ahu'ula, the brilliantly feathered cloaks that embodied their heavenly status. They were worn proudly on the battlefield, and it was said that in the history of the chiefs, that 4 times 40 chiefs came, 400 in all. Everyone had a beautiful feather cape and feather helmet for the head. Hawaiians called these feather-clad chiefs Kawela o Ka'ua, likening them to rainbows or rain heated by the sun. In a land with abundant natural resources, the greatest treasures were hulu o manu, or bird feathers. They were reserved exclusively for the chiefs, and the most important featherwork were ahu'ula, symbols of Hawaiian royalty. In battle, they were spoils of war to be acquired by chiefly warriors who had captured, killed, or otherwise defeated their opponents. Great chiefs such as Kalaniʻopuʻu and Kamehameha possessed dozens of cloaks, and they presented them to people they held in high esteem, including captains and explorers James Cook and George Vancouver. Serving as symbols of chiefly divinity, rank, and authority, these cloaks were the greatest treasures that 18th and 19th century ali'i could bestow. I love this image. Unfortunately, the names were cut off on the bottom, but the one on the left is Kivala'o, the one in the middle is Kalaniʻopuʻu, and the one on the right is associated with Kamehameha. So what you have here is you have an uncle, the uncle of Kamehameha, and the father and son relationship on the left. This also represents the conflict that then led to the unification of the Hawaiian kingdom under Kamehameha. But these ahu'ula were not merely gifts. The chiefs used them to reinforce political and diplomatic transactions. They solidified relationships and they engendered obligations. This is Kamehameha I's letter to England's King George III, and it's dated March 1810. In it, he requests a number of articles, including a small vessel, brass guns, bunting, and English colors. Kamehameha closed the letter, which obviously he didn't write, he had somebody else write on his behalf. But in closing the letter, he says that he was sending a feathered cloak and begged your acceptance. In this cross-cultural context, the ahu'ula was a royal insignia that could both validate the letter's authenticity and pledge Kamehameha's commitment toward future relations with the king. To further solidify this relationship, Kamehameha's son, Liholiho, traveled to London in 1824 to meet with King George IV, the son, because by the time he arrives in England, Kamehameha III has passed away, and he's now trying to meet with the fourth. He bears with him about a dozen feathered cloaks and capes. Although Liholiho dies from the measles before the meeting could take place, at least 4 of these ahu'ula eventually became part of the royal collection in London, presumably presented on behalf of Liholiho after his death. When thinking about the concept of mana, or spiritual power, one can consider 2 separate but related kinds of mana. We often hear this: inherited mana and acquired mana. So when thinking about those things which are associated with Kamehameha, we can also think about these categories. Many of that which we know of that is associated with Kamehameha was acquired through genealogical lines, or through the chiefly lines, but many were also obtained by him through conquest, through marriage. One item, however, stands out, and that is Kamehameha's famed mamo ahu'ula, consisting entirely of mamo feathers. So according to David Malo, such an ahu'ula was called an alaneo, and it was reserved exclusively for the king of a whole island. Yet I was hard-pressed to find anyone prior who in fact possessed such a cloak. And it leads most people to conclude that this mamo cloak was created for Kamehameha within his lifetime. According to the Bishop Museum website, it's made up of yellow mamo feathers. Interspersed in the featherwork along the front edges are red iivi feathers, which are only noticeable from a close distance. Its net backing is made of olona fiber, and it's estimated to consist of about 450,000 mamo feathers. The mamo bird only lived on the island of Hawaii. According to John Dominus Holt, the total lack of design suggests that Kamehameha was beyond the need of symbols to declare his human status. He was too close to the gods to be in need of the usual markings of rank. As we know, the mamo bird, we did not have yellow birds. We had black birds with a few tufts of yellow at their wing and tail. So it was an extraordinary effort to gather yellow. Therefore, although red is the primary color of royalty and rank throughout the Pacific, in Hawaii it is actually yellow that conveys the highest rank possible. Now, this number of 450,000, I worked at Bishop Museum for 14 years, and this is the language that we use to talk about this cloak. But there's good reason to question this estimation. So many of you know that Kalaniʻopuʻu's ahu'ula which was originally gifted to Captain Cook in 1779, along with a mahiole and a hand kahili. They ended up at Te Papa Tongareva, which is the National Museum of New Zealand. And they were ceremonially returned to Hawaii in 2016. Now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service asked Te Papa for a feather count. They had been able to comply with a previous request for 2 other Hawaiian feather cloaks and a feather hat that they had loaned to the De Young Museum in San Francisco for the exhibition Na Hulu Ali'i. So for the loan to De Young, conservators had counted how many feathers were in each bundle. Okay, so bunches of feathers are brought together and then they're bound to the olona backing of these cloaks. So they looked at several of these little bundles and they determined that there was a range of 7 to 12 feathers per bundle. So they took the average of 10. So in each little bundle was 10 yellow or red feathers. So for the Kalani Opu'u request, they measured each linear part of the cloak so that they could calculate the total area. They then needed to find out how many feathers were in each 1 centimeter square. So conservators Rongi Tikanawa and their intern, Kokororai Nitana, counted how many bunches per square centimeter. Now, one of the things they learned, and many of us might guess this already, the red feathers are smaller than the yellow. Therefore, there were more red feather bunches in 1 square centimeter than in the yellow, which had to be factored in. Grace Hutton is the collections manager for Oceania. She had a daughter who does mathematical computations. She sent her the measurements because they had to figure out the square centimeters for the red versus the yellow. Okay, so their conclusion was that there is a total of 1.079 million yellow o'o feathers and a total of 3.339 million red EEV feathers. So we're talking in excess of 4 million feathers for this one cloak. So if this red and yellow cloak has over 1 million yellow o'o feathers, how many do we actually have in the entirely yellow cloak? Now I'll point out that this is mamo. We're talking mamo versus o'o in terms of the different yellow in each of these cloaks. However, we can imagine that even by the most conservative of estimations, this 450,000 is far, far below what it really should be. Okay, so if Kalani Opu'u, we can only imagine this exponential difference, right? So where, and if this was made in his lifetime, where would all these feathers have come from? How might one chief, no matter how powerful, amass so many feathers? So this may offer us a little clue. This is a red cape, ahula, and it's at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard Museum. I'm sorry, the photo's quite bad, you can't really see it, but if you looked really close, you see that? So there's actually like an internal design, and when you flip it over, you notice that indeed there's been a removal of olona and a repair, and like the netting was re-sewn in and more feathers were attached. So this, to me, is one of the concrete evidence of the removal of some other color of feather, probably yellow, and then they, interestingly enough, went back in with the more plentiful red. So at first blush, you actually wouldn't notice that there was anything missing. So again, this particular ahula was featured in the Nahulu Ali'i exhibition, the Royal Hawaiian Feathers, that went to the De Young Museum. So that's why that's the picture came from there. This back photo, actually, it's from Peabody Harvard itself. And then the catalog for the exhibition says this cape collected around 1840s. 1840 is important because it shows that featherwork was sometimes reworked and or composed of fragments from other garments. Here, for reasons not known, the yellow feathered sections of the cape were removed and the red feathered most famous feathered possessions is, of course, Kukailimoku. He is a quote. I was reading Dr. Malcolm Chan's book, and he finds that actually it's a reference by Kamehameha. That's the first time that you see the mentioning of Kukailimoku. And Kamehameha says, at one time, Liloa desired to build several heiau in Hamakua, from Kukuihaere to Koanami and the vicinity of Kealakaha. When a house for the god was completed, Liloa, the kahuna, the favored god, Kukailimoku, the chiefs and servants, went up from Waipi'o to the pork-eating feast for the dedication of the chief's heiau. So we must learn from this that the god is mobile and that he is Liloa's favorite. Kukailimoku's history also factors into the traditional Hawaiian practice of dividing rulership of the kingdom between two people, he who preserved the lands and he who preserved the religious system, as manifested through the care of the feathered war god Kukailimoku. As with Umi, Hakau, and Liloa, Chief Kalaniʻopuʻu gave to his nephew Kamehameha Kuleana over Kukailimoku, while he gave to his son Kiwala'o rulership of the land. Kamehameha's defeat of Kiwala'o enables the consolidation of power and paves the way for the eventual unification of the Hawaiian Islands. Now this is the label that can be found on Bishop Museum's website, their database. Again, it says that this Ki'ihulu-Manu is said to be Kamehameha's war god. It goes on to kind of describe how it was made. It says that in 1850, this was presented to the Protestant mission and transferred to the Museum of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions in Boston. So it travels away. Then in 1895, Bishop Museum purchases this from the American Board of Commissioners. So it returns home, and then it notes that it was taken possession of by Kamehameha at the Heiau Kahala Waiua. There are many accounts of Kalaniʻopuʻu and Kamehameha consulting with Kukailimoku in times of war and conflict. These are citations in Kamakau, Desha, Papa'i'i. Again, portable god could be carried into battle. He also is mentioned at Kamehameha's death in Kekuhaupio and his warrior Kekuhaupio. It talks a little bit about how Feather leaves, enters basically where he is on his deathbed, and because it's not from Kuka'ilimoku, they decide that the god does not want to meet with him. Now, interestingly enough, this is not the only Kuka'ilimoku known to travel with gods. So this is a piece that was in the, this is a catalog of the Hawaiian Government Collection Citation, but this actually belongs in the Hawaiian National Museum, which existed prior to the formation of Bishop Museum. And it says, Ka'ili, wooden idol, the famous war god carried by Kamehameha through his battles. It was purchased in 1877 for the National Museum at the estate auction of Charles Kanaina, father of King Lunalilo. Again, believed at the time to be Kuka'ilimoku, war god of Kamehameha. I think that also replicas of this image are featured in the recently opened exhibition at Bishop Museum, Kini Ke Akua. So I think when anybody who spends time thinking about histories, researching mo'olelo, looking at museum records, it's a little bit like forensic science, right? So one of the best researchers is Adrian Kepler. So ideally, you want to find some evidence of how it was created, or who had it, or what it looked like, and where it was in space and time at this particular juncture. And then you're going to follow it on its path, and it's going to at some point end up at a museum. And then you're going to be able to know exactly that this particular one being cited is the one that's mentioned in the mo'olelo by Kamakau or Papa'i. And I think this is one of the tricky things where something is in a museum record, but it's hard to trace back then. Is this the one? Like, which is the real Kuka'ilimoku that is being mentioned? Because sometimes he is wooden, with a wicker helmet. Sometimes he's all wicker wrapped with kapa. Sometimes he's all wood, and it's in reference to a temple image. So it's one of these names that continually you see in so many different contexts, and then there are multiple iterations of Kuka'ilimoku in museums, not just in Bishop Museum, but really throughout the world. However, that is not the most famous of his wooden images. This is probably the most famous of Kamehameha's wooden war gods. She was not male, obviously. This is a female figure, the stratospheric Kihawahine. Kihawahine lived the latter part of the 16th century, a real person. She was the daughter of the High Chief of Maui, Pi'ilani. Transformed upon her death into a mo'o, or lizard deity, Kihawahine took her place among the legendary mo'o who protected waterways, ponds, and passages, ruling from Moku'ula, the sacred island of Lahaina, well into the 19th century. According to Pukui, her mana was renowned, and she was the only mo'o who could move freely from pond to pond and island to island. Kihawahine was coveted by Kamehameha, who aligned himself with her through marriage to the sacred Maui chiefess Keopuolani. While his favorite male deity, Kuka'ilimoku, helped him acquire land through conquest, it was Kihawahine who legitimized his authority and enabled him to keep and retain the land. Kamakau notes that Kamehameha was known to travel with her in carved form as a female image with lime bleached hair. Following the unification of the Hawaiian Islands in 1810, Kamehameha had established a house for his ki'i, including Kihawahine, his kalai pahoa images, and other gods at the beach at Hulu, which was in Waikiki. He also later moved his gods, his assemblage of gods, with him to Kona. What became of her after his death and the abolishment of the religious system in 1819 and the coming of missionaries in 1820 remains unclear, but she was not forgotten. More than 60 years would pass before Edward Arning, a German physician, arrived in Hawaii. Known as an avid collector of Hawaiian mea makamai, he had many a friend seek out such precious things. This, in his own words, is what unfolded in the year 1885. By chance, the planter Herbert Purvis heard of the discovery of 2 god sculptures and their whereabouts on the rocky coast of Hamakua, Hawaii, near Lapupoepoe. He promised to do his utmost to secure them for me. After a perilous boat trip, during which the passengers tried to land many times for 2 days and a night, and then finally had to swim to safety, Purvis was able to get close, but could not land at the spot itself because of dangerous sharks. The 2 Hawaiians who accompanied him, however, could reach the place and the empty pit in which the figures were hidden. Besides the sculptures, they found a human skull. Knowledgeable Hawaiians labeled the 2 figures as images of the goddess Kihawahine and the goddess Kamehameha. Once again coveted, Kihawahine was among some 500 objects donated to the Ethnological Museum in Berlin by Arning in 1887. I just want to pause and point out the image on the left is a current photograph of her. This is what she looks like now. The image on the right is a photograph that was taken actually by Arning. And you'll notice that number 1, her eyes are missing. And number 2, her teeth, there's teeth missing. Of the 12 embedded human teeth, only 6 remain. There are references to the fact that when Ali'i died, that not only did Hawaiians, did the people, the populace, knock out their teeth in grief, that they actually also did it with the images. So it is worth considering whether her loss of teeth and whether her loss of sight is in fact directly tied to the death of Kamehameha. The place where they uncover her, it's actually, so it's Laupopo, it's known as Laupopo Iki. So if you go to Waipio Valley, it's actually, you have to hike. You go in, you have to like cross 9 ravines, and you get this tiny little place that's an outcropping, and that's where they had found this image. It had actually been found 5 years before. It had been removed and taken to this neighboring valley, and there was a scourge. People fell ill, and the kahuna said that it was because these images had been disturbed and they were returned. That's where they were for 5 years, until then Arning Purvis decides he's going to go and take them out. So that's how he knows that they were there, because they had been discovered previously. But who is this other image that she's found with? For those of you that were here last week, you might remember that Amy Mulligan shared a mo'olelo about a woman, Kamehameha, who lived in Iolika'a on the windward side. Her husband was taken hostage, and she ultimately saves him by escaping with him into an ulu tree. According to Kamakau, the breadfruit tree became the goddess Kamehameha, a goddess famed from Hawaii to Kauai for mana and for seizing governments. Kamehameha became one of the goddesses of the chiefs of Oahu. She was taken by the chiefs of Hana Maui. She became a goddess for Kamehameha during his reign. So this is the image. The catalog for the museum says the image of the god, Kamehameha, has the shape of a torso with a missing head. The hollow figure, 92 centimeters high, is made of wood. Can anybody guess what kind of wood? Any guesses?
Coal.
Ulu. It is made out of the breadfruit tree. So there are numerous other mea vaivai ali'i associated with Kamehameha. Too numerous to mention in the time that we have today. One of the most famous ones is Naniuola, a very large temple drum at Bishop Museum. It came from Papaena Heiau, which is associated, it's on the slopes of Leahi or Diamond Head. One of the things that makes it so significant is that it has human teeth embedded into it. So when you think about the male or the voice that calls out, that calls forth, actually quite a few. There's an ipu aina as well associated with Kamehameha that also has many human teeth in it. Probably one imagines those who were defeated in conquest by Kamehameha. Now, what can we discern from these mana-filled mea vaivai? We know that Kamehameha's rise to power was facilitated by these mea. These akua hulu manu, these ki'i la'au, they are constantly found in the stories of his battles and his rise to power. They were both inherited, like the akua hulu manu, but also acquired, like Kihawahine, through marriage, through alliances, or by conquest. But some, like his alaneo, his mamo cloak, which made manifest, right, in physical form, the mana that he had achieved and that none have since matched. That Kamehameha's mana persisted in his mea vaivai, and that this was transferred to his lineal descendants. But others also continued to covet that which was associated with him. Therefore, you see during King Kalakaua reign, his effort to incorporate much of the royal insignia of Kamehameha himself, thereby enhancing and legitimizing his authority to rule. When we think about the importance of the maintenance of mana to sovereignty for Hawaiians in Hawaii, it bears us thinking about what happens when that mana departs. Is there a reduction in what happens here in Hawaii that then mandates at some point some sort of kahea or call out to that which is remote? Since contact with the Western world, Native Hawaiians have sent their mea vaivai ali'i, their chiefly treasures, out into the world. For over 2 centuries, feather cloaks, helmets, god images, and a myriad of other precious items projected the mana of Hawaii and our chiefly lineages. Yet for everyone sent intentionally, there were many more that were removed without consent, taken under cover of night, with little regard for the wishes of family, community, or lahui. Laws enacted by the legislature of the kingdom in 1860 impose up to 2 years of hard labor or a fine of $2,000 should anyone willfully dig up, disinter, remove, or convey away any human body from any burial place, or shall knowingly aid in such dismemberment, disinterment, or removal. And yet today, hundreds of iwi kupuna still remain abroad. So too are their moipu, burial goods, once united in death but long since separated. Centuries later, their descendants made pilgrimages to these treasures found in distant locations throughout the globe. For decades, Hawaiians have visited museums in New Zealand and throughout Europe to pay homage to the cloak and helmet of High Chief Kalaniʻōpuʻu and others. They leave offerings to the temple image of Ku at Peabody Essex Museum in Massachusetts, and recently traveled to London for the opening of the Oceania exhibition to gird Ku in his malo loincloth. Moreover, these kahea or calls do not go unresponded. In 2010, Bishop Museum hosted a landmark exhibition, a Kuana Kapaya, which temporarily brought together the last remaining Ku temple images in the world. And in 2016, the chiefly adornments of Kalaniʻōpuʻu returned to Hawaii. So I want to end with a quote by one of my most favored scholars. So the Maori scholar, his name is Paul Tapsell. And he's talking about Tonga, precious mana-filled things that leave. And he's talking about a particular tribal group, Te Arawa. When such tonga were presented by Te Arawa to other tribes, they were literally launched on an unknown comet-like trajectory. Sorry. One more time. When such tonga were presented by Te Arawa to other tribes, they were literally launched on an unknown comet-like trajectory that sent them beyond the horizon of Te Arawa's consciousness, sometimes for many generations. Concern about the future well-being of these tonga were never an issue because the recipients understood their obligations. Then one day, they, the tonga, suddenly reappear, charged with the spiritual energy of past ancestors, returning home to their descendants in a blaze of rediscovery. Generations of the original kin group may have been born, lived, and died without knowing of their tonga's continued existence in another part of the universe. Suddenly, it streaks back into their lives, often as a result of some significant life crisis, reaffirming the kin group's connections to the ancestors who were originally associated with the tonga. So I want to leave us with that thought and with the notion that many of the items to which calls have been made and that kahea has been returned or responded to have been male in nature. The 3 Ku images, those, the Mahiole and Ahu'ula associated with Kalaniʻōpuʻu. Is it not now time for us to think about this kahea to Hikiha Wahine, to bring back and return to the balance of Hawaii, that Wahine energy that has been missing. Mahalo.
For the Hawaii name, is that her chief there?
So that's, I doubt that highly.
Can you repeat the
I
question?
actually don't know.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is whose teeth are they? You're talking about the original teeth, because obviously they went back and they put somebody else's teeth, which is kind of interesting. Probably German, so they're probably Hawaiian and German teeth now in the key. I don't know. I would imagine that it could be hers or a close ancestor. Yeah. Yes.
Did you say when the drum goes away, it has mana when it's here, and then the drum is taken someplace else? The mana stays with it?
Yeah, so this is something that Paul Capsule talks about. But I think it's true, like if we think about Kalaniapu'u's cloak, that originally actually was called Cook's cloak because it was a cloak that Kamehameha gave to Cook. But sort of throughout the trajectory of its history and its travels, spent a lot of time in Europe, then it ends up in New Zealand. It's being cared for, loved, visited by Hawaiians. That they would, the term is like ambassador, right? Although my friend says even ambassadors get called home. So, but you think that, like any of us, we are growing from our journeys and our travels and our connections to other people. Therefore, the same thing can be said of any of these mea vai, that they're actually accumulating mana through their travels, and when they return, they're actually returning more powerful than when they left. And the other thing to note, he goes on to talk about is actually then when that, so there's one of the things, and I'll say this because I was working at Bishop Museum at the time when we had the Ku exhibition, and I would just kind of hang out because it was, number one, an amazing thing to be in Hawaiian Hall and have these 3 temple images gathered together. But it was also just to be around people and hear what they were saying and their reactions, and sometimes there would be this kind of hostility, like, they were stolen by missionaries, and you know what I mean, and people were mad, were upset, and I guess my approach was that, because of the end of the kapu system, everything that remained was destroyed, right? There are these accounts in the 1820s of bonfires where hundreds of images were being burned. The fact that they left ensured their survival. And for us to be grateful for the care that was afforded them so that they could come back to be appreciated. I mean, I think that ultimately people would prefer that return be permanent, right? And these are the nature of, I think, conversations that continue. But the point is that the existence of these collections, their very existence far away, indicates that there's some sort of connection between Hawaii and their institution or their community. And that can be the basis of then renewed or ongoing conversation. Yes?
I wonder if you could think about making of these materials who part of it was, for instance, the organ, or you can see, I don't know what it's made of, or how big it is, what it weighs.
Which one? Which one got?
Kind of silver.
So there's a kind of an interesting exhibit at Bishop Museum right now, I said Kinikeakua, which actually spends some time talking about the art or the practice of creating or carving these images. If you think of it like today, there are schools with specialties, so there were likely images, groups that were under, say, several seasoned or and then they had their students or haumana under them, and they might have a very, very distinctive style. So actually, if you spend enough time looking at, say, the Akua Hulu Manu, the feathered god images, or the carved images, you'll see that there's similarities, that they almost look like they were created either by the same artist or by the same collective. And then in terms of the materials, if you look, there's actually quite a bit of resources out about the return of Kalaniʻopuʻu's cloak. There's some videos that were put together by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. But one of the things that Mehana Hind points out is this idea of abundance. That if only feathers were reserved for the elite, then your ability to wear the biggest, longest, most beautiful cloak was a sign that you had that much mana, that you could command that much resources. So it reflected not only the mana of the individual, but the fact that the resources existed at all. So then when we look at things today, what does that say to us in terms of the care of our forests and our waterways today? Like, that it's not just a conversation looking into the past, but how it can help to inform where we head to. Yes.
I had read that, I think it was Kamehameha III, when he went to Kauai to meet with Ka'ahumanu, that she wore Kamehameha's cape.
Yeah.
Is it the one we see on
Yeah,
the
so, so there is several mo'olelo, but one of which is that on his deathbed, he tells her, and only she's the only one that can hear this, obviously, that he would like for her to wear it, right? So these were not things that were made for women. They were made for men. But so she does don it, much to everybody's like dismay. But again, I think that it goes to the idea of what constitutes authority, and what role did these mea vai play in that transition of authority. So does her donning it then really solidify her role as kuhina nui, right? And interestingly enough, they also factor in as funeral palls. So at the death of an ali'i, oftentimes you'll see them in the procession, that the cloak, that their royal cloak would be over their casket. The Kamehameha's cloak is seen in photos of Kalakaua laying across his throne. And there's people from Yamani Palace here who probably add more stories to that. But it appears constantly as a very powerful symbol throughout the entire Hawaiian monarchy, both Kamehameha and Kalakaua.
And it was the big yellow one.
Yes. Yeah, there is some confusion, so I will point out one thing. There's one more larger, almost entirely yellow piece, and that is the Pa'u of Nahi'ene'ena, who was the sacred daughter of Kamehameha and Keopuolani. So that is 20 feet long. Anyway, it's the single largest featherwork known to exist in the world. But so in some of the photos, actually, that is what. So some people think that is what's laying on, I think it's Kalakaua's casket. Actually, the casket is laying, if you can believe it, on top of it. So the bottom is the pa'u, and on top of the casket is the mano cloak. And then when Nanette will be talking about Kamehameha's death, but when you read the accounts of Kamehameha's and Kamehameha's death in London, like when you think about like these major elite who are passing away, thousands of miles from home, and they only have their little entourage. They surround, the room is covered in cloaks. Like they hang them, they drape them, they create this room filled with cloaks that then creates that aura of being home. Yes?
Can you talk about the hulu po'o in regards to status for women, showing the status of ali'i women?
Yeah, so there's a lot of images from Weber and others that show wahine, ali'i wahine, wearing lei po'o, head, and then also a'i, neck. Interesting because I think we do not see men wearing them, but now we have, I think, it's changed so that now it is appropriate for men to wear, because you do see men wearing lei hulu as well. But, again, I think reinforcing the idea that feathers were reserved for ali'i. Can't get any closer to the heaven than the birds flying, right? So there is that natural connection. Again, also colors played a big part of it. Yellows, reds. There's occasionally green. So Kauai was known for its green feathers. I don't think there's any. I think there's only one surviving ahu'ula that has green in it, though. Maybe an indication kind of Kauai. Like, I don't know. It's one of these things that, we can only sit around here and conjecture, right? But the fact that the demise of the kingdom of Kauai is that not reflected in the demise of the green ahu'ula. The things that that their ali'i were most famous for, that which defined them as they disappear, so too does these attributes of them. I don't know if that answers your question.
At the Kalakaua exhibit at Honolulu Museum of Art, I was just astounded by a pure black ahu'ula. And I forget who it was. Who owned it, but
Was that the riding? Was that the riding cloak? And it actually had little like Asian kind of yeah. So I think he brought that. They picked up feathers from elsewhere, somewhere in Europe or something, and he brought it back, and he had it made for yeah. It will remain forever one of the most sorrowful things that the Nahulu Ali'i exhibition never came to Hawaii. It was an exhibition that was created to come to Hawaii after San Francisco, after DeYoung. There was a gathering of people that came in and said, kind of, if you could have anything in the world among feather work, what are your favorite things? So that actually, the red one, that got in that exhibit because I said it was one of my favorite, most interesting pieces. And so it ends up at San Francisco, but never comes here. And one of the things is, they were able to get quite a number of pieces from European museums. And those European museums lent them because they thought it would come back and be seen by its source community, not because they thought people in San Francisco would get a kick out of it, although they did. So I think, we continue to hope to create opportunities for that which is a way to come home. But I will leave on one note, which is, it's fascinating, that Keone Nunes, who's a Hawaiian tattoo artist, scholar, he said, Yeah, because everybody's super excited that Kalaniʻapuʻu's cloak comes home. It's amazing that this really complicated situation, from the point of conversation to arrival in Hawaii, is less than 2 years. You know, international loan agreements, they take years and years. And the fact that something happens in this short of a time really means that there was a lot of sort of mana on multiple sides making this happen, and that he chooses to want to come home as well. So I was like, oh, what a success. It all happens. And then Keaunui says, well, that's the easy part. The easy part was bringing him home. The difficult part is maintaining the kuleana, the commitment to continue to care for him in a way that ensures that he remains. So we can't just think of, oh, let's just bring them home, because that's only really the beginning of the conversation. Mahalo.